Whoa. Why do I? Hello, hello.
Hello. Hey, how are you?
Hey.
I'm so smart using these.
Oh, wow.
Cool. All right. Whoa. God, I hate this
Got
computer.
it.
so
I got
much.
it.
Okay, good.
I couldn't get my audio to work. We're good. We're golden.
Okay, who's here? Cole Nate's here. Ben's here. Dane's here. Whitney's here. Nate's here. I don't know who it is. One, two, three, four, five, six, seven. I think I'm missing two. How's everybody? You guys, you okay with the consent form?
Yeah.
Yeah.
With the
So-
what form?
The Zoom asked you to consent to be recorded.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah.
So last week, I think Friday at like 4 o'clock, they said we had to send you this form and post all this form and blah, 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 but it was clumsy. We actually didn't have access to it, even though it was supposed to be Google Docs. And then then somebody from Zoom said, hey, guess what? We can actually make it part of logging in so that your parents couldn't come back and sue us for having you be recorded without permission or something like that. So I think it'll only happen this time or maybe one more time, but there you are. So you guys ready for our speaker?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, she's pretty amazing. So couple things. I'm working on speakers for next week. I'm trying to have speakers for every week, so you don't have to, I don't want to do what some other people are doing, which is probably just lecture over Zoom. I don't think that would work real well. So I'm trying to get people to actually lecture on some of the topics and kind of go along with the book readings, and then get people who are actually doing what it is that we're talking about, you know, covering meetings and what that's like in these in these times. Did you fall or did you?
No, it was my phone that fell.
Okay.
Still trying to get this thing worked out.
Yeah, no. I didn't realize my first floor is so tilty, so my chair is actually kind of like this, so I keep sliding. So I've got bricks, but then the dogs put their heads on the bricks, and then the bricks move, and I'm just like, it's like I'm on a tilt-a-whirl. And I literally keep falling off my chair. Someday I'm actually going to go. It's going to be quite amusing.
So Amira's trying to show up. She's just trying to find the invite.
Oh,
Yeah. I just got a text
It's
from
on
her.
an email I saw.
Yeah, that's what I got too.
Yeah, I got the, yeah,
But
I got it through
she's-
the email.
and Styles won't allow himself to be recorded, so I don't know if he's going to participate or not.
What?
Are you there?
Audio recording.
Yeah, I don't have a webcam or anything though. I hit okay and everything. I just don't own a webcam.
She said she didn't get the email, which is odd.
It was sent like I think
Yesterday?
either yesterday or 2 days ago.
I think yesterday.
Yeah, it was sent yesterday. At 2:23 p.m.
There you go. I sent it through,
2L, right?
yeah.
Yeah,
Any-
I'm waiting for her text back, but she's coming. It's just she's just trying to get through.
What happened to Ben?
Right here.
How come I just... You guys are like coming in and out. That's so bizarre. Oh, there's Kyle.
Kyle, what's up, man?
This is why you guys can never leave early, because I know you will go. Okay, so other announcements. Okay, so just remember, there you are. There's a mirror. Okay. I hate this computer. Ugh! I've never had this sensitive of a trackpad. Like I end up deleting things all the time and they just go places. I'm just old. Just remember I sent you a note. Make sure you save your files with some sort of identifier, your name or your initials or something. Because remember, I have lots of classes at lots of schools. So, and I have people helping me. I have a TA who's helping me save things, and I'd hate for her to say, "Oh, I've got 4 people named Cole," which I actually do, and start putting the wrong grades for the wrong
Yeah.
people.
Right.
Remember, your names are trends that happen sometimes. Then there was a year I had 7 Whitneys. Oh my gosh.
Ew.
I know.
Well, that's not that common. I think I've only ever known one person with my name.
Yeah.
Yeah, you're the
We were
first Whitney
total
I know.
opposites.
Yeah. Yeah, I went to Middletown and I've only ever known one girl with your name as well. I have never known another person.
Yeah.
I've only met one other Dane
Me
before in my
until I
life.
met
I never know one Dane. Just, Ron Dane. That's about it.
I know Dane Cook, but that's
Yeah.
the only well,
Yeah, Dane Cook. Yeah.
yeah.
So I will let you know about the speakers next week. It's either going to be people who work for me at the Sun Gazette, or I'm trying not to do that. I want to get some people from the Altoona Mirror, which is a sister paper. And if worse comes to worse, I will get people from the West Coast, just because 3 o'clock they could be more reliable than 6 o'clock. But a lot of municipalities have changed their evening meetings to like 9 o'clock, 10 o'clock in the mornings, because a lot of people, their families are home, and normally a 6 o'clock or 7 o'clock meeting in the evening wouldn't be a problem. But in these awkward times with schedules and more people working from home, that is more of a burden now for people to go out in the evenings, or to have evening meetings. So I've noticed, like, for example, tomorrow morning, where I live in Lock Haven, our city council's having a meeting tomorrow. Like, they always have their evening meetings. So I don't know why they think it's easier in the morning in terms of transparency and democracy. I don't understand. But anyway, so that will be my plan. I'll let you know, and I will post their bios as soon as I get them. And remember, every time you ask a good question, you get 2 points extra credit. It has to be a good question.
We're doing another article like we did last week.
This one, no, not today. This is just for your benefit. This supplements.
Oh, okay.
This is what you're reading in the book, and what we talked about before break when I was talking about, open meeting law and how to get records, how to read agendas, how to sort of prepare in advance before going to a meeting.
Mm.
I just figured sometimes it's better hearing it from somebody other than me, and from out of a book. I'm not crazy about this book. I think it's more talks about the field of journalism than actual practical experience. I would have chosen a different book for you. So since I know a lot of people who are pretty great at what they do, I thought, why not? You know, I brag about you guys a lot, so I thought they should meet you.
Hey, thanks.
So we're not like doing like another assignment like the one we just did for the speaker.
No, you don't have to.
Okay.
Just take good notes because this stuff will be on the exam. However, we decide to do the exam. The live service we have on D2L still isn't available until April 22nd. So, but I was going to do an AP quiz next week through D2L. I'm just going to do the same format. Some questions that are sentence, you edit them to make them conform to AP style. Are you guys comfortable with that?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Seems fine to me, yeah.
We can, okay, if you have a notebook, write this down. This is what I have so far, as far as topics. So titles. Okay, so this would be everything from like a book title to a movie title to a reference book to a script. Okay, and that last one is significant because a reference book is different from a novel. Okay. And then, so that's actually a pretty big category. So look all those things up and it will send you lots of different places. And then the other category is going to be numerals and numerals with symbols. So think about like $sign and percent. So for example, we use a $sign, but we don't use a percent symbol. And people make a lot of mistakes when they talk about dollars in sentences.
Wait, these are the AP quiz topics, titles and numerals?
Yes.
Okay.
And symbols with numerals. And the reason we make mistakes when we talk about dollars in sentences is because we don't say it in the correct order. We're going to save $10, but the symbol is before the word dollars. If you write in broadcast, you actually spell it out, $10. You don't use the symbol. If you write in radio, you don't put the symbol. In print, we put the $sign and then the numeral. Even if it's less than 10, we put 7. But people still put $7, then they put the word dollars all the time. It's counterintuitive to the way we speak. We write one way, we speak another. We say, oh, we've reduced our potential for COVID spread by 50%. And we don't use the symbol. It makes absolutely no sense.
We spell percent.
We spell it out. They don't ask me, but that's the way it is. Okay, so those are the things. It may be 10 sentences, but probably 5. So I'm working on it. So I will, post the topics again. I want to keep these going. Pardon me?
This is next week?
Yes.
Okay.
And then your meeting story will be due the week after on the 15th, and I'll let you turn it in on Wednesday because there will be some meetings on Monday, Tuesday. So you can turn it in on the 15th at 5 p.m.
And you said you're going to try to find a meeting for us?
No, you
or is that still on us?
That's on you. You got a whole document of links.
Yeah, of course.
But I've got speakers for you who we'll talk about.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, questions? We can talk after Ginny talks too. So if you have any more.
Okay.
Everybody good?
Yep.
All right, I'm gonna admit Miss LaRoe. Let's see if Ginny's here.
This might be a stupid question. So this is just for note-taking purposes, right?
Yes.
Practice note-taking.
Yes.
But then the exam, you said there's going to be questions on the exam. Is that going to be also what's going to be discussed in this class time, or?
Yes.
Okay.
Open meeting laws, getting records, those types of things. You guys, if you want, you can write up a summary for 10 points extra credit. How's that?
Okay. Sure.
It sounds good.
I see Ginny.
Hi, Carol. Hi, everyone. How's my sound? Can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Good.
Excellent. I can hear you all.
Well, welcome. I'll let you talk. Everybody, I'd like you to meet Ginny LaRoe.
Hello. I'm glad to be here. Do I need to give just a short introduction of myself?
Depends. Did you guys read your bio? Read her bio?
Did read the bio.
Mhm.
So I like to say I'm a retired journalist because I'm one of the few people who worked in the industry at newspapers. And this is sort of dark, but I left on my own terms. I was surrounded by layoffs and furloughs and really troubling times in our industry. But I got to work at 5 daily and newspapers in 5 states for close to 15 years before joining a nonprofit that helps and supports journalists and members of the public obtain records, public records, access to meetings, and defends the freedom of the press in other ways. So I am always excited to talk to journalism students or students who care anything about the news industry, to talk about it and talk about reporting. It's one of my favorite things to do. So thank you for inviting me. I can tell you, as someone who started at community college and worked on the student newspaper there and graduated with a journalism degree and worked at newspapers, that it is the most fun I think you can have professionally. And I think it's the best stuff to take courses on and participate on in undergrad, because you learn so much about how the world works by seeing it from the inside. And then you also learn so much about critical thinking and sort of analyzing information, especially when everyone's lying to you and you have to decide what to tell people about what everyone's saying. So it's great to be with you for this short period to talk a little bit about public meetings and how to cover them and how to get a good story out of a public meeting. And since I can hear everyone, I thought I would just start with just a question. If anyone here has gone to a government meeting, school board, city council, planning and zoning commission, or any other kind of meeting before, either as just a citizen who wanted to participate or as a journalist or writer in some capacity. Has anyone been to one yet?
I have not.
No, I'm not.
I
see you, MBC 716.
My name's Mitch. You can call me Mitch.
I bet. I see you've gone.
Yeah. Well, back when I was in high school, and our school board would recognize students on things that they have done and accomplished. And I went with I went for an accomplishment one time my freshman year, because our high school radio station won a local award in sports broadcasting.
Cool. So you saw your school board in action then.
Yep. And then I went another time my sophomore year because our bowling team won the league. And then our senior year with our band winning And then again, my senior year for being selected as in April for Student of the Month.
Wow.
Okay, well, those are a lot of accomplishments. Most of us go when someone's in trouble or getting fired.
I was not that kind of kid.
Positive reasons. Well, I thought what I would do is I put some thought into what I wish someone had sort of told me before I had to just jump in and start going to government meetings of all different kinds. And it is what I would do before the meeting, during the meeting, and after the meeting to make sure I got my story or got my information. So what I thought is I could just give you highlights, maybe like 5 to 7 minutes of those specific things I would do, and then let you ask any questions about any of that. Does that sound good?
Sounds good to me.
And has everyone already thought a little bit about your meeting assignment? Carol laid it out really great. So if you haven't looked at her assignment in detail and really thought her direction, it's really good. And so some of the stuff I'm going to say is going to replicate that, but just from my own experience covering meetings. Is that everyone's already thought about the government covering a news story assignment?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Cool. Okay. And am I talking too loud or too quietly?
You're great for me.
Oh, you're good.
Okay. All right, cool. So the first thing I would do before I would go to any meeting, whether it was a state school board, a city council, is I would go to that government's website. I would look and make sure I knew, time and place, and I would pull up the agenda. The agenda is the only thing that most governments are forced to publish a certain number of days or hours before. And it is your roadmap. It is how you know what is going to be talked about. It is how you know what potential stories are there. The agenda. And the agenda almost always is going to be hard to read because it's going to be sometimes making reference to city ordinances or statutes without describing them. So they might just say, we're going to discuss City Ordinance 52.93, and that can have to do with raising taxes. You don't know. So you might have to Google and really research. So find the agenda. So you know what order they're going to talk about things, who's presenting, when is public comment. Every city, county, school district, school board, state agency, and every is required to publish some kind of an agenda with very few exceptions. So if you can't find it online, you'll have to reach out to a PIO, public information officer, or someone. But I know that sounds really basic, but I've sent young reporters sometimes to, oh, you got to go cover this, so let me know what's on the agenda next week. And if it hasn't been someone who's covered government meetings, they didn't realize you could get the agenda. So the agenda, and then related to the agenda is you can often get the packet of materials that all of the officials of that entity are going to have and look at. Sometimes they're published online. Sometimes you have to ask for them. There's almost always a right for you to access those records and to look at them and make sense of it and try to find out what you might want to cover. So that's the agenda and the records. Your sources, you want to find out who are going to be your sources at this meeting. They might be the elected or appointed officials who will be conducting the meeting. It might be the city, county, school board attorney who's going to be able to explain stuff, and he might be or she might be participating. It might be the members of the public, activist groups, grassroots groups who are organizing opposition or support to something that's on the meeting. And how do you find those people? You look for this other important piece of information. It is the meeting minutes from the last meeting. Those are almost always published on any government agency's website, or you ask for them. The minutes could just be an outline of written materials of what they acted on, voted on, who spoke, or it may be a video or a live stream up on a website. So often anything that's being talked about in a government meeting has been talked about at past meetings, because they don't just talk about things once. It's usually like a bunch of times for a number of reasons. So you kind of want to look and see who participated at the last meeting and what was decided. So minutes, you know that just from life. The minutes are the notes from any meeting. And at almost all levels of government, they take pretty clear notes and are required by various laws to be published on a certain time frame. Then the third point, and this is just in advance of a meeting, again, 3 things I would do, is understand the lay of the land. Am I covering the full city council? Or is it a committee of the city council? Is it a subcommittee of the city council? And who sits on that? I want to have a list of every name of the people who are part of that body, so I know their first and last name before I go into that meeting. This is all going to be on a website, but of any agency at this point. I want to know the lay of the land. What exactly is meeting? Is it the school board, or is it the planning and zoning commission or subgroup or working group? Is it the you may think you're going to a regular meeting of a county commission, but it may be a subcommittee. It may be specialized to only deal with certain things. So someone might say, oh, the city council's meeting, but it's actually just a 3-member body, a subgroup of the city council. So you want to know, get the lay of the land. And also included in the lay of the land is the process. Are they doing one of a series of 3 required meetings or public hearings, they might call a meeting. Sometimes meetings are called public hearings. So sometimes you have to meet a certain number of times as a government agency before you can do something like develop a public site into housing, or eminent domain takes some property that belongs to private people, make it public. Sometimes, so you want to know the lay of the land. Is this the 10th time they're talking about this time? What is the actual exact body and who is involved? So those are the main things. I can't imagine covering any meeting anywhere without doing those things. Are there questions about that?
So going into understanding the lay of the land, does that also go when you're at the meeting with who's there and who's not, and then what are they going to be presenting, and then how the vote's going to go, yay or nay?
So that's a great point. So really good beat reporters will usually know how a vote's going to go, because maybe they've called each and every one of those city council members or the school board members and said, how are you voting on this? And they might know. And they might even do an advancer, saying, an advancer being a story that comes before the meeting. They're expected to, because 8 of 10 said they're going to pass this thing. However, if you're not the main reporter in that community for that issue, I wouldn't expect you to call up every member and find out all those sorts of details. But if you were, it was your full-time job to cover that body, and there was a really important vote, a vote to extend a shelter-in-place order for 30 days to prevent the spread of the coronavirus or something, and you were the main TV station, or you were one of the TV stations or the Associated Press or whatever, though, and there was a public vote on that, there often isn't, but I would include in that finding out how people are going to vote. What are the controversial issues? Sometimes a city council member or a school board member will call a member of the press and say, hey, it's not real clear from the agenda, or it's not on the agenda, but I'm going to raise this, that we fire the superintendent, we fire the police chief, I'm going to bring it up. And that's just part of the source building that you would have if you covered an entity at length.
I'm going to add something to what Ginny said. If you're covering a really big board, so for example, I cover the school board in Center County, and there's a lot of people. There's 13 members because it's a big county. So what I started doing was literally drawing a map. Sometimes if I had a chance, I would take a picture of all the nameplates, so I didn't have to write down furiously who said what. I could just go number 1, number 2, number 3, because they had some were really long names.
That's such a good point, because it's so hard to know sometimes every member of an entity and keep up if they're all talking.
To get the full story, and I understand that at times, are there times where you have to talk to each member of the board individually, to get a full story?
Sometimes, yeah, because you want to represent how you want to give everyone a chance. Say you're doing a hot story about how the sewer and water board is incompetent and they're not getting new trash and recycling bins out to people, and you hear that they're thinking of firing someone or whatever. Maybe they've been asleep at the wheel. I mean, and there's 6 of them, and you want to give all 6 of them a chance to comment before a story, before a meeting, after a meeting. Yeah, times, but most of the time, I would say the people whose job it is to cover a meeting regularly of a particular entity kind of have a sense of what's going on, what people care about, and they may even have their story written like 90% of the way before they show up at the meeting, and like top it off with a vote or some discussion, a couple quotes, and you're done. Nowadays, the reality is you're most likely filing your story within minutes of the meeting ending.
Are there ever meetings that you wanted to go to that you were told you couldn't attend for any certain reason? Like,
That's a
are there
great
certain
question.
reasons that, for any reason what they're covering is confidential and need to be kept away from the ears of like journalists?
Whoa.
That's a great question. I have a whole section here on secrecy. So what's great is that yes, and I will tell you a really scary time I had to stand up in the middle of a meeting that they didn't want me in. There are laws in every state, every city, and every county, and at the federal level that require certain meetings to be open to the public unless they are to talk about a few very specific secret things, which I will talk about. If it is a meeting of government officials who meet the definition of a public body, and there's a quorum, a certain number of them getting together, they are required by law to let the public in, and they can't make any exceptions. And though that is part of our sort of access to government ethos in America, government does stuff in the open. There's lots of exceptions. They break rules. The organization I'm with, we file suits against cities that meet in secret for 5 minutes longer than they were supposed to, and the conversation went off onto public topics. So they often don't want you there when they're talking about something that might be controversial, but what we're talking about are government entities that have to let people in. And they may try to do things to make it less interesting while you're there. They may try to schedule it at a time that's inconvenient so you don't show up. You may show up and they may go, oh, wait, they're meeting in secret. You have to wait till they come out and do the public portion. So that is definitely something I want to talk about. You will encounter meetings that you think might need to be public, but you're not sure. And that's when you'll go to, so say a certain number of the school board members ended up gathering in the hallway and started talking, and there was no public notification, but it turns out it ended up being a quorum. It was 10 of those 13 school board members Carol covers. All of a sudden you have an unscheduled public meeting, and they might be violating your state's open government laws. And that's where becoming familiar with your local laws about what you are legally required to be, or legally have access to, can help make you a watchdog for open government. So I will now talk about at the meeting, the 3 to 4 steps I would take at any meeting I cover, whether I'm there in person or remote, and talk more about secrecy. Did you have a specific example though of a meeting you thought you might not be able to attend, or that they kicked you out of at some point? Is there anything juicy there, or are you thinking just in general? I didn't get your name. Whitney.
I'm Whitney. No, I was just wondering in general, like if there's any reason why you would not be able to be there, because sometimes journalists are like viewed as like horrible people.
Right. I know. Good thing we have the First Amendment.
I didn't know if that was like an instant to where like, okay, journalists bad, okay, you can't be here.
So what's great is our laws in this country protect the public generally, and the press sometimes has even greater protections and access, but never less. So if the public, if your mom or your uncle, they are allowed to attend that school board meeting, members of the press cannot be turned away either. That is the foundation of all of our open open government laws in this country. What gets confusing is when there's a private entity, like a nonprofit organization that has a meeting and maybe there's a government official there. It doesn't necessarily mean that has to be open to the enemy of the people, the fake news media. But if it's open to the public, they can't no one can turn away the press. There can be limits. Oh, we only have room for one or two of you, a pool report. You have to sit over there, and that's where you have to negotiate. That's a great question. So at the meeting, so whether you're getting ready to live stream it or walk into those doors, there's a couple things as a practical matter. One of them is what Carol has already said. I need to make sure I can know who's talking when they're sitting on the dais. I need to know who they are. So if I'm allowed to take photos or I draw a little sketch, I need to know who people are, what their names are, so I know when they're speaking who they are. Usually it's, the mayor, the president of the school board in the middle, and then they all sit around, and the city or school board attorneys usually up there, sometimes not. And just like you've seen pictures on C-SPAN of Congress, the Senate and the House, people have their assigned seats usually and a name tag. You need to know that you can see their names and hear them. So my thing is, I always like to sit where I could see and hear, but I could also run out if I need to chase someone to get a comment. Would you add anything to that? Just practical step, Carol?
The only time is if it's like really crowded. I tend to sit in the back. I mean, they always have designated press seats, but if it's really crowded, I tend to sit in the back because I do want to sit in the back. And if
So you
it's
can come and go if you need to.
If it's very hostile, I don't want to be in the front because they're going to be hostile to me also. I have found, and I do want to leave.
In a big open room where like hardly anyone's there, I might sit in the front so I can hear really well and see them. So that's one. I mean, that's just practical. You can't say, oh, and somebody said this. You need to know who said it. Somebody said they would never vote on a millage to raise property taxes here. You need to know who said that. So that's one. Two, you need to have a plan for taking detailed notes. So I know that sounds really basic, but people assume you can record and then have time to transcribe later. And I would not ever rely on taking your phone and recording or even being allowed to. You should have a plan for taking notes, either writing or typing contemporaneously. So typing as people talk, which most of us are faster at typing. So as long as you've got access to a computer, I would just make sure you have a plan other than recording. That's two. And I have two more important points at the meeting. The other is public comment. Know on the agenda when they are allowing public comment and have a plan for being able to both capture what people are saying in public comment, and if you need to, get to those people before they leave when they're done, because you may need to ask them follow-up information. Here's an example. In the public comment period, that someone may comment about a vote they're taking, something that's on the agenda, that they're going to dedicate more money to a homeless shelter. They may have 5 people speaking against it. They may have 5 people speaking for it, or a member of the public may get up and raise a whole new issue that you may find more newsworthy that's not on the agenda. So making sure you have time and you've planned for to listen to the public comment, because you may get your own story out of it, or that may be the only time you're able to get a sense of how the public, as represented by the people who spoke during public comment, feel. What is public comment period? It is a legally required portion of the meeting in every jurisdiction in the United States where the members of the public have a chance to speak to their elected officials. And this is not when the press is supposed to do anything. You're there as an observer. But say you were there as someone who lived in a community, this is where you would put your name down, or you would go up in whatever procedural rules they have and follow their time limits and say, I oppose this, or I'm for it. You haven't talked about my issue. And accurately capturing what someone said during public comment to quote them in your story is the way you want to do it. you might not hear or understand how to say their name or know if they're with an organization or speaking on behalf of themselves. So reporting on the public comment is both knowing to listen for it during the meeting, and then chasing that person down if you need to quote them in your story to make sure you understand the spelling of their name, email address, or phone number if you think you might really route them or their issue. Make sure you understood something they said if you couldn't hear it very well. And maybe I'll ask you guys this. When you quote just a regular person in a story, what information do you want to have about them? Anyone?
The
Last name.
profession.
Last name? Profession?
Mhm.
Sometimes age, sometimes city of residence. Sometimes having all those things, whether you use it or not in the article, is important because there might be 5 Bob Smiths, but you got the Bob Smith who is 39 and lives in Hershey. So you may find your editor wants to include some of that information to distinguish them from other Bob Smiths.
Especially if a Bob Smith does something not great.
Right.
Because we had that in Wisconsin. We had somebody do something not great, and we had somebody with the same name go, but that's not me. And we need
That's
to,
not me.
it didn't have a middle initial.
Middle initial is important.
And, and neither one of them had, like, well, now what are we going to do? We had to find a way to distinguish so that we could write it in a correction. But then we also wrote about it and say, this is huge. This person did something really bad. So
yep. That's important. So if you may not use all of this, but sometimes it feels invasive, but say someone comes up and said, you're talking about raising taxes, and here's the thing, I never pay my taxes anyway, and blah 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 blah, and you're gonna quote them once, and it's like, well, I heard their name, and you might think, why do I need to ask them so much invasive information? But it's really to their benefit. So I would ask that person, okay, just make sure this is how I spelled your name. Is this correct? And what city? So you actually live in the city, not in the county. And what do you do for a living? Why is that important? Oh, just to make sure we are clear about who we're talking about, or whatever. And asking for an age is sometimes it feels awkward, but it's important sometimes, because then it could be relevant to your story, or your editor might be able to use it to say, oh no, we definitely know who this person is because we have their age. So when I looked them up in the voter rolls, I could tell, that we're talking about this person and we verified this information. So a lot of that you will get more comfortable asking for from people. Them. And then the last thing I would say about when you're at the public meeting is often you have to wait till the very end to be able to go up and talk to the elected officials, appointed officials, the mayor, the county executive, when they're done. And sometimes it is, sometimes when they break, you have a chance to talk to them to get further comment. What I would say is you just need to keep clear in your notes when you're quoting someone who's participated in a public meeting about whether they spoke, whether you're quoting them about something they said out in the open on the record, meaning in the official meeting, or did they just say it privately to you? So you might saying, I am opposed to building this animal shelter. They said that in front of the public, but talking to you in private, they may say, well, unless I find out that we can raise our taxes to cover it. So you would say in your story, so-and-so said in the, during the meeting, but in an interview, he said this. And that's just an important distinction, is when you're quoting someone, was it something totally out in the open that everyone heard, or was it one-on-one for context? Was that it may be new information that people there didn't hear? Okay, so that's at the meeting. Now here's the big thing, Whitney, about secrecy, about whether they want to say and have their meeting in front of you. Do you guys know the term executive session?
Yeah.
Benjamin? Did you say something?
No. Yeah, I heard it.
You know, it means secret.
You all better say yes. Don't embarrass me like this.
Yeah.
My own corner. Come on.
I see you all taking notes, so it's cool. Executive session the coded language for we are meeting in private and there's nothing you can do about it. Can anyone think of examples of legitimate reasons a government agency could meet in executive session?
Terrorism.
No.
If they're talking about firing a public official.
Portions of personnel.
Say
Private-
this. Say like they're on the verge of like making a decision, but they have not fully made that decision yet and need to by the next time it's open to the public. Would that be a case they would
No, unless it had some other reason.
What if you're trying to pass a bill or like a law, but like they don't want the public to know about it yet?
Ooh.
That would be an exact thing they shouldn't be talking about
Yeah.
in private.
Yeah.
Okay, other ideas? Those are all really smart.
You guys
They
should
do
be going through your notes too. I'm just saying, because we went through this.
What about precaution decisions like now? Would that be something they keep in private so they wouldn't get the public all roused up about it?
Yeah, so
Like
yes and
before
no.
the decision of the stay-at-home order, like, do you think that would be something they would have discussed in private?
Let's talk about that. Those are usually decisions of the public health agencies that don't have open meeting requirements because it's an executive decision. So it's legislative bodies, school boards, city councils, county councils, where it's multiple elected people who meet, like your House, your Senate, all of that, where you're required to make decisions in public and have meetings in public. County health department officials are executives of executive agencies that don't have public bodies that meet. So they can just call up the mayor and have a conversation with the mayor or whoever your top leader of your community is, and county commissioner, whatever, and say, we need to do this. We need to have shelter in place. Here's our health and emergency orders. And those are executive decisions. So when you think about your branches of government, the president doesn't have to have public meetings. He's an executive. The city mayor, county commissioner, health department, director of public health department. Those are executive positions. In most communities, your county council and city council don't have to, in your state legislature, don't have to meet to vote on those decisions. So there is no meeting. So your governor will come out and hold a press briefing and say, I'm telling you right now, we are shelter in place as a whole state until I say we are not, and here's my executive order. And there is no body that meets publicly to have that decision. So on that, what you might want to know, though, is what emails and texts, conversations did they have? What's on the calendar that they had leading up to those decisions? And that's where your helpful Pennsylvania open records or right to know law, Carol, that's where you might decide to submit an open records request at the federal level. It's called FOIA. In most states, it's called Public Records Act request or some Freedom of Information request to find out written materials exchanged between public officials. So you'll want to get good at writing and filing those, but they take a long time and sometimes require lawyers. So the other things you guys said is really important. So personnel decisions, often they can meet an executive session to have private discussions about personnel decisions. But if they are going to take a final action that requires public disclosure, then they would come back out and put it on the record back in open meeting. Someone said terrorism, and so there's a lot of stuff that can be classified, but if they're just discussing how the city is going to respond to potential terrorist threats, that doesn't necessarily mean it's secret. They have to talk about a lot of public safety stuff out in the open. But the litigation, someone's going to sue the county. Someone has sued the county, they're going to do something that they think they might get sued over. There's usually in most communities the litigation privilege. So if they're going to talk to their city attorney to get legal advice, should we settle this case? We've been sued because these cops were shaking down people based on the color of their skin, stealing their IDs and their money, and we think we should settle it for, $50,000, $100,000. Can be talked about in private, but then when they ultimately vote to settle a case or there's a record involved, then they have to go put that back out on the public record. So even things that they can meet in private about, often at some point they have to put it out on public record, and it's called like reporting it out publicly. And so they may come out of an executive session and go, okay, back on the record. All right, so we met in executive session and a lot of it's confidential, but we have decided to settle this lawsuit. And then later there will be public records about that. And that's a really common thing. So like the firing of a police chief, they may talk about it in private, but eventually, as you know, that becomes public. So usually waiting for them to come out of executive session and come back into the public room, then they will generally put something on the record or say, there's nothing to put on the record now, we'll put it we'll publicly disclose it later. So it's usually in most communities, executive session, certain personnel things, certain attorney-client privilege, litigation privilege, that sort of stuff. And that's usually, in most communities, the only thing they can legitimately talk about in private if it's a public meeting. Here's the one thing I will say. When you become an expert on open government laws and you know what they are supposed to do and what they cannot talk about in private, and you hear them say, well, we're going to go into an executive session to discuss something. If it sounds like they should not talk about that in private, that's where you might have your own story about government meeting in secret. Those stories come out in the press a lot. They talk about this stuff in private, and here's an open government lawyer and a professor and a media advocate who say they shouldn't have discussed that in private. That might be its own story. So that's one reason it's good to know your open government rules, restrictions. And then the other thing is, occasionally, and this very rarely happens, but in some states, in some cities, you may have, as a citizen, as a member of the public and a member of the press, a sort of role you may play in preventing the secret gathering, the executive session, an illegal secret meeting. And I can share with you one anecdote. I'm not sure that you will ever encounter this, but say your job is to cover a city council and you know that they want to discuss something in private and they're trying to find a way to discuss it in private. But you thought it was a pretty weak argument, and you would know these things if this was your entity you were covering regularly. Well, for me, it happened once in a small town in Arkansas. I was a state desk reporter for the Arkansas Democrat-Gazette, and I covered this town called Benton. It was a small suburban city, and I would go to their city council meetings every month, and sometimes there were small committee hearings. And I knew that there was something they didn't want to talk about in public, and someone made a motion to convene an executive session. And the city attorney said, okay, could you state for the record what the legal authority is, like what category of private information? Okay, so we're going to discuss the hiring of a new police chief. And the city attorney said, well, okay. And I knew that there was plenty that they had to say that still was subject to public disclosures. So in that instance, I was confident enough in the public records laws and of my state, and I knew enough about what they were going to talk about that I knew it was legally required to be put in the record. And so I gathered my courage, and with the cameras rolling on the meeting, walked up to the microphone where the public gives their public comment and said basically a script, something I had prepared and planned to say in the event that this happened. And a lot of states have prepared this sort of script for you as a member of the public to say if this ever happens. And this is what it was. And this is to state for the record an objection to secret meeting, which is a good thing to do in case your newspaper ever needs to sue or something. And so I got a reporter who's not supposed to be part of the story and said, as a member of the public, a representative of the Arkansas Democrat-Gazette, I want to state for the record that I object to you meeting in executive session to have this conversation about the hiring of police chief. I believe that there are aspects of this conversation that are subject to public disclosure, and ask you to reconsider your decision to meet in executive session. and continue this conversation here in public. The city attorney, whose one job is to keep that government out of lawsuits, that's their job, said, okay, so you've heard this objection. And they said, okay, well, I guess we'll go back to talking about some of this on the record, and then we'll meet in private to discuss counter negotiations on pay or something like that. So that was nerve-wracking. And I'm sure my voice was all quibbly, but I felt a duty to play that watchdog role and probably wrote about that in the story, I'm guessing. So hopefully that never happens to you because people are following the law, but just know that as a reporter, you have power to keep things above board and out in the open. Then the story, I just have these tips. Carol has laid out for you kind of the best practice. You do not want to start your story from any meeting. They met Friday at 5 p.m. for 60 minutes. They talked about a range of things. It's not a news story. It's that's a report. Those are minutes. That's not a news story. So here are just some things I think that could become a news story and that you can look for that might be of interest to people. Pocketbook issues. Anytime they're going to raise rates, raise taxes, consider anything that costs the public more money, you can almost always do a story, find a story out of that part of the conversation. What issue drew a lot of members of the public to give public comment? Like if the room is full, who is there? Who are they? Have you asked why they're there? Whatever they care about is probably controversial, and that might be worth a story. Anything involving hiring or firing of a department head. So, the head of public works, the head of the police department, any hiring and firing and of that top administrative position, which they talk about at these meetings, it's worth noting because that usually means, either it's just a new, important, expensive, high dollar salary or someone's in trouble. And sometimes it's political. People have to fire a department head all the time to put in someone they feel like that they can work with, they being the mayor or the county commissioner. The other thing are legal settlements. So if they've been sued, governments are always sued. They're always, they're never not being sued. But they do, your local governments, school boards, et cetera, do have to talk about at these meetings outcomes of legal settlements. And often it's, so in school boards, they're often sued under federal civil rights laws dealing with access to education, the IDEA law, and cities and counties are sued over their police department's misconduct or conduct or excessive force, wrongful death, lots of stuff like that. Those are always going on. When they talk about we've settled this case, then that might be a story because then you can go back and look at the case. So those are just some things that might come out, but you never know what might be a juicy, housing, homelessness, owning to make something commercial use that used to be residential. These are all things that might be newsworthy. And those are just some of the things that pique my interest. And they have coded words for all that. Taxes are often called millages or bond proposals. And litigation that they talk about, legal settlements, often they just refer to the statute. So you might have to Google. It might just say 5.972, and you don't know what that is. You might have to Google it or ask somebody. So that's everything I would say. And if you do half of that stuff, you'll be able to find a good story.
Thank you.
Any questions?
I have a question.
Remember, identify yourselves.
Yes, I'm sorry. Who's speaking? Can you identify yourself?
My name's Amira.
Hi,
Amira Lawal.
Hi, Amira Lawal.
So I have a question. Has there ever been a time in a meeting where maybe someone said something you were not supposed to, and maybe one of the speakers said, don't write that down to you or any of the journalists?
Yeah, that happens all the time. And those are things where you have to develop a dispassionate professional response that said, this was said and I heard it and it's in the open record and I've taken note, and if it merits inclusion in my story, it will be in my story. And then it's up to you and your editors to determine whether that information or statement is important for the public or whether it's harmful. People might say, oh, well, my daughter, she was a victim of domestic violence, and, you know, Jennifer, and then they've identified a victim of domestic violence while they're talking about, you know, advocating for an issue. And then that's where you have to use your journalistic professional responsibility, whether you want to, you know, identify that person, which would violate all sort of professional norms. That they can't make you have freedom of the press in this country. No government official or company official can tell you what to print or not to print. If they told you and it's in your ears, they told you and it's in your ears. And if they said it in a public meeting, it's already part of the public record. It's not going to be stricken from the minutes. That's where you have to come up with a very, you know, dispassionate, so you're not argumentative or combative way to say, you know, that's not possible. And you can always just say, and you can talk to my editor. Hopefully you have an editor.
This is Cole.
Hi, Cole.
So kind of basing off that question, is there ever a time, or like for the public comments, are they aware that there is the freedom of the press and that what they say can be used in an article? Or will there be a time where someone, you know, wants to let the media know how they feel, but they really don't want it to be published in a paper or something like that?
Right. I mean, you can understand that. What if your parents felt strongly that, you know, a landfill shouldn't be authorized to go in their neighborhood, but they don't really want their name in the paper, right?
Yeah.
So you have to be human and sympathetic and understand when it makes sense, when it's really important to quote someone by their name. But the reality is anyone who goes up to a microphone in a public meeting with the lights and the camera, you know, they know that that's part of the risk and they know that's part of the reality. I would say you have to use really good judgment about when you can summarize, you know, 3 or 4 people spoke against this, 3 or 4 people spoke, quote, you know, often they complained about noise or smell, and then choose, you know, based on your good judgment when you're going to quote someone by name. And if someone speaks and then they see you and you're a member of the press and they're like, I'm sorry, I didn't realize the press was here, you can educate them and say, well, here's the reality. They're going to live stream this. They're live streaming it now. It's going to be in a tape on a website. It's going to be widely circulated. What are your concerns? Do you have fear for your safety? Do you have fear for your privacy because you disclose something? You can be human and have that interaction, but and that's a good point that there are some people who will speak at a public meeting who will not realize that it's captured for all of eternity and there are reporters there. But that's going to be a very, very few number of people. And often people who have those privacy concerns will say, well, it's my right not to tell you my name. Yeah. And they will say that to the government officials, because not every government requires people state their name when they give public comment. There's some First Amendment issues around that. Some people think you can require people to state their name in a public meeting. So someone may find that, or they give a fake, there's maybe nothing you can do about it. You have to use your good judgment to say, well, I'm not sure that was that person's name, so maybe I shouldn't quote them, or maybe I quote just, you know, one of the speakers mentions this. But the best thing I can say is one of your roles as a journalist is to educate people on what is public and what's already documented and what's already live streamed, what's already out there. So if someone's protesting on a public sidewalk, and they have a sign and the photographer takes a picture, they're out there on a public sidewalk protesting. And they may be surprised because they're not familiar with how the news media works, but that is fair game. Yeah, but I think being human, and if you feel that someone really has public safety concerns about something they said, I think you hopefully have someone you can discuss that with, an editor. But and always get their phone number. And if you feel it's really important, someone said something that is crucial to the public debates and understanding of an issue, and you know that it's in the best interest of the public to include that person, and you're just going to want to get their email and phone number and say, I'll let you know for sure. Say your story's not running till the next day or something. I'll let you know. So at least you know that you're being quoted. I think that can go a long way.
All right.
This is Ben.
Hi, Ben.
Hi. How regularly do you find yourself or your colleagues utilizing FOIA?
Okay. And when you say FOIA, do you specifically mean the federal one or
Yeah, the
any
federal.
open records?
Well, either or, to be honest with you. I mean, the federal one would be more interesting, I believe. Have you ever had to file?
Oh,
federal?
yeah. Yeah, I'm probably still waiting for some returns I'll never get from years ago. So it is not fast to get a response. They ultimately, there's statutory requirements that they respond to you in a certain amount of time, but that's just to respond to say we're going to take more time. So I think it's great, and you can use the Student Press Law Center's FOIA generator. You can look on my website. I'll give you that link. It's good to ask for records from federal agencies and use the Freedom of Information Act, which is out now, actually the Freedom of Information and Privacy Act, I think, which tells you that it's hard to get information. It takes time, it takes skill, it takes follow-up, and often it takes a lawsuit to follow through to get that information. So often you're going to want your sources to leak you information or find it for you without having to file that if you really want to get the story out, because otherwise you're going to be waiting forever. Should always be filing them. If you cover, an issue that is subject to some federal agency's decision making, you should be filing requests so you can stay up on the issues. But you should find alternative ways also to find that information. Would it be part of a court record? Would it be part of a state? Would a federal agency be talking to a state agency, and you can request your own state agency under the state FOI law, often called a public records law? Because it's not timely. And like right now under coronavirus emergency orders, almost every federal agency is saying we don't have time to respond to your FOIA. So, and actually my husband, his law practice, he's a former journalist. He specializes in access to information. So using FOIA, using Public Records Act laws, and reporters are having to call on him right now almost daily to go to fight over those things that should just be part of a routine disclosure process. So I haven't, so right now my organization, we're about to file a lawsuit under the Freedom of Information Act because FBI declined to give us something that our lawyers think we have a right to regarding the death of a public defender and a leak investigation into that involved a journalist. So I'm working, I have two experienced lawyers on my nonprofit, and they couldn't get the information. So we're gonna have to hire a law firm to go get that information. So, it's important to file FOIAs. It's important to keep governments accountable, but just know that it is almost always a little bit of a delay and sometimes a fight. Now, some beat reporters will file, and this was something, so when I worked in Florida, the Sunshine Law there, the public records law there, the Sunshine Law, which is the state's version of FOIA, required government agencies to keep stuff proactively public. So I wouldn't have to file one to get government emails. They were just posting them regularly. The police department, I wouldn't have to ask for an individual police report. They put the stacks out or they publish them on their website with redactions. That was just part of that law. That doesn't mean you didn't have to fight over it and file certain records requests. But there are other places in other states where you do proactively have to ask for stuff. And so there might be a reporter. Okay, so I managed a business reporter who covered energy. So like electric utilities, and the agency that regulates those, we always wanted to see their communications about PG&E, it's called, Pacific Gas and Electric. So he would have to make a written request, a state FOIA, and then that agency would post it up on their website for everyone to see. So you can see what every reporter is asking for. And then we would have to follow up. And he would do that pretty much every couple of weeks. We'd ask for something so we could keep up with what's going on there. So it is important to know how to file a FOIA for any federal agency or a state records request. It's important to know how to do it. And then it's important to know who to talk to so you're writing a good request that's narrow enough that it's not outrageous. And I think a good goal, if you guys could come up with before the end of the semester, one open records request letter to submit to someone for something reasonable, maybe just say any emails sent or received by this mayor on this day about coronavirus or something, and then generate a request under your state's open records law. Maybe do a FOIA one, a federal one. You could do to the Department of Justice, like something fun. Like you can get now Tupac's death records. They're starting to respond to those. That's cool. BuzzFeed has a FOIA journalist who specializes in it, and he's been getting records released from old rapper unsolved murders and stuff. So that's pretty exciting. Was there something in particular you were interested in doing with open records?
Not myself, no. But I know this career will involve, having to access it down the line eventually. So
yeah, so and you can do that as a citizen. You don't have to be a working journalist. Any person, usually in most places over 18, can file an open records request. And it's good to know how to do that and have some confidence in it before you're all of a sudden on deadline with the story. And just, I will also say though, there was probably times in my career where I go a year or more without filing one because most states say a verbal request is sufficient. So I would ask for my information, and if someone said, "Oh, submit a records request," I would say, "Well, you're required to honor this verbal request as a request under the Arkansas Freedom of Information."
Yeah, that kind of went into my second question, which would have been how the FOIA laws or First Amendment laws differ state to state.
Yeah, they do, and so just knowing them.
Yeah.
So, for instance, under FOIA, the federal Information Act, they can require you to put it in writing, and it's better too. That doesn't mean you can't ask for information, and people do all the time. Some states say, like California, you are not required to put it in writing, but it's better to make a written record of it to keep things going.
True.
So it just varies. So knowing the sort of basics of each of wherever you're working, and knowing, so when we talk about FOIA, the State Department, the Department of Homeland Security, the Justice Department, and it's under in its subcategories, FBI, U.S. Attorney's Office. That's where you submit a FOIA. Some states, they call their state law FOIA, but if you're asking the mayor for his emails, you're submitting under that state's laws. So you should know the basics. And I'm not saying have a law degree. I'm just saying look for a tip sheet like this and know generally what you're entitled to and how fast they have to turn it. Here's something cool. It can be a crime in some states to withhold public records.
Yeah.
Not every state, but in a few states, you can refer it to your local district attorney for them to issue a misdemeanor citation or worse. Georgia, Tennessee, a few others. So, no one likes to see the over-criminalization of something, but the idea of some PR person from you as a journalist and them getting a citation is pretty exciting. Well, on that note, I feel like I've talked way too long, so I'd like to stop talking now. So you guys can get back to your plan of action for the day. Carol, is there anything else?
Let me ask you a question. Is there any moment when you might give people a break? So for example, we had near Modesto, where I used to work, and you guys know I worked there because this was the West Coast Hershey area. There was some people who thought it would be a really good idea to go swim in an irrigation canal, but they didn't think,
That's absurd.
Well, it does get hot there.
And there wasn't enough water in the canal.
So
you see where I'm going?
Yeah.
So they tried to open, and they had to get out of there really fast. So they basically lost about, 1 million gallons of water, which again,
in drought country.
And this is people had pasture, and like I say, there was dairy cows. It went from field, few layers of paperwork straight to Hershey, and it was also tomato growing, and Hunt Wesson was the other big ag industry there. So people lost water to irrigate their pasture. And so I heard about this as I covered the water board for the county. That it was called a tri-dam. So we had 3 levels of dams. So I covered it up in the foothills, and I'd gone on the tours. I knew these people very, very well. So in some sense, I actually felt it very personally. Like I knew these people, like what was going to happen. People I worked with at the paper, were irrigators. So my first thought was, I know what these board members are. And I know they're at a coffee shop and they're breaking quorum like crazy. And so I thought, gee, I need some coffee. So, and there they are, you know,
Did you
there's
bust them? Did you
Pardon?
bust them? Did you say,
and they're like, well, this is an emergency. And I'm like, I think you need to have an emergency meeting. How many of your growers need to hear from you right now? You need to show some leadership. And
right.
and I'll see you there at 10 o'clock. You know, and
Would you end up writing?
Pardon?
Would you end up writing?
A lot. But the hard part was that one of these board members was also very close friend of the publisher of the paper. And so I walked into his office. I'm like, it was a really good decision. You didn't need coffee this morning. And I'm like, I'm going to lose my job. You know?
Right.
But the point was that people needed to know what was going to happen besides this lengthy, you know, court battle, which ended up being a misdemeanor because there was some 1862 law that still said if you cause, you know, millions of dollars in damage because of damage to a dam, which this was, it's still a misdemeanor. I'm like, real hot shot.
Oh, wow.
Oh, it was amazing.
Yeah.
You know, even the people who were the plaintiffs, like, it's a really good lawyer. But
yeah,
it was heartbreaking. But for weeks, I would walk into that coffee shop and I'm like, what are you doing?
Right.
You know?
Well, so does everyone know what Carol means when she says quorum?
Pardon me?
I would say, does everyone know what you mean when you say quorum?
You guys know?
Yeah.
All right. So see, when you're a real nerd and all you care about are like government rules, that word is popular, but most people don't think about it very much. It just means the minimum number of participants for it a full meeting, an active meeting. So, you know, for instance, if you have a school board that's 13 people, they may consider quorum at 10, meaning there's enough people to conduct business. So right now in Congress, I should know this, but say the Senate is going to meet, but everyone's sick from COVID-19. How many people do they need to physically be there to have quorum to do Senate business? I should know that number. Can someone Google and tell me what's quorum in the Senate, in the U.S. Senate? And I don't know if it's a simple majority or something. And it's QUORUM.
51.
Really?
51.
Yeah, I see that.
51.
Yeah.
Article 1, Section 5, the Constitution.
All right, see, it's constitutional law. What a quorum.
Hey!
Uh-oh.
That sounds like a pet.
Yeah, she's the devil. I told you she's the devil.
Well, this is fun, guys, talking about this. What I'm going to do is I'm going to follow up with an email that has some cool free resources for you, where you can get a template on how to submit open records requests. You can get access to our free legal hotline, where you can, as anyone in the world, you can say, if I have a First Amendment right to, you know, film in my community. You can just ask those questions and we respond for free. I don't, because I'm not a lawyer. And I'll show you how to follow us on social media, on Twitter and Facebook, where I actually run our accounts, so it's just me. But if you want to stay in touch that way, and I'll have my email address, so if you come across questions or have career questions, I am here for you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, come on.
Thank you
so
much.
Thank you.
Everybody, come on.
I'm going to figure out how to walk out of this room now. I'm going to let you guys get back to it.
I think bottom right, it should say leave meeting for you, Jenny. I could throw you out, but that would be rude. Okay, so how's everybody?
Well,
Pretty interesting.
Yeah, it's a lot more to it. And I know we covered this in like a really, I remember giving you like really frantic, quick lecture on this before a break, thinking you might have a chance to cover a meeting or start planning a meeting, not dreaming I would never see you again in person. So I'm thinking, no, you know, we covered 3 reasons a board could go into a, you know, closed or executive session, but so we're clear on that. They could cover personnel. They could go through attorney-client privilege, to discuss litigation. Or the third one would be they're going to cover negotiation strategy, labor settlement. They're going to discuss contracts with their between union, stuff like that. So, how many of you have thought about covering your board meeting yet?
Are they still gonna have them because of restrictions of travel? And is a board meeting actually gonna be considered essential travel?
Did you look at any of the links I gave you guys like last
Not
week?
yet, but I didn't know if that was gonna be considered essential because
Most of them are still meeting. They're just meeting remotely.
Okay. I was just checking because where I live, we can't really go anywhere unless it's essential.
Well, like I said, they're meeting remotely. They have to provide services and make sure hospitals are ready, So we just got the, stay in place order, Center County, I think yesterday. But we don't, we're not out of supplies yet. Our hospitals are okay because we went from 1 to 68 to 600 in 3 days. So something's happening there.
Scott Perry is having a live press conference. I don't know. I don't know if that would count as going to a meeting though.
Okay, I think somebody, I don't know who that is.
No, it was Ben. Who?
Scott Perry.
Scott Perry. He's a congressman for Republican congressman for Pennsylvania.
Oh. Okay, whose dog is it?
It might be mine. I'm not sure.
Okay. Well, that's not mine. They're sitting on the bridge. Put my chair in place. I'm just laughing because the joys of having to do all these things at home. Yeah.
Yep,
Well,
they're definitely barking.
I'm not laughing. I'm laughing with you. Well, you've got several options. You look at the links I gave you, which was I tried to find all the jurisdictions near you. So you look on their website. Okay, they'll give you their agendas or meetings. Some around me, some of the smaller townships, for example, Bald Eagle said, that's it, we're not going to meet for March or April. But that's a small township within Clinton County, within Center County. But most, cities, they have to, make arrangements and they have to meet because people need them to meet. And they have to do it virtually. They have to have a plan, but they might be meeting at a different time. Like I talked about at the beginning, they may move their evening meeting to a morning meeting, 9 or 10 o'clock, and they're going to post it on their website, or they may be posting it in their newspapers. So I would suggest, since this is the last day of the month, you would look up those links I gave you and make your plan very quickly so you can get agenda material in advance. And also look up the meetings from the last meetings to figure out what their plan is. Maybe they will meet, this week and next week and develop a plan for the next, for April.
Mm-hmm.
Would you expect a lot of public citizens to participate in these, online meetings? Or since they're not, meeting in person, do you think there might be a little, not as much as a usual meeting?
The one we had for Clinton County, they had a working meeting yesterday, and there was a lot.
Okay.
Yeah, they had a lot of people because people are worried.
Yeah, of course. I just wasn't sure since it's online if that just changes their. Nah.
Yeah, and I think for us, the biggest issue is broadband, which it always is. It's how are we supposed to function? So there was a lot of complaints about just Comcast. That was a big part of it. And, and we don't have it. There's no food. There's no supplies. Yet they're building the park down the street. How?
Yeah.
This may be a stupid question. In terms of the links to the government sites, that's where we're supposed to be looking for a meeting.
That would be a good place to start. But again,
because there isn't anything there yet. So that's why I was I'm under the links to local government sites, and there isn't anything there yet.
On D2L?
Yeah.
All right, we log back in.
Unless it's just on my end. I don't know if anybody else was having that problem. So I was gonna brainstorm that, and I don't see anything.
Should be a Word document. Why do I look like I have a cape? Do I think I have a cape?
And it's just so I hear the back down. I think like sure.
Okay, there it is. Okay, my bad.
I like
It was just a
that.
separate tab for like government links, so I was confused for a second.
So it means you didn't look at it before then, huh?
Nope. To be honest, no, I did not.
Well, tell me that. How do I do any speech story, by the way? I think I have horns. It's really distracting. Huh? Does anybody else need a haircut really badly?
I do.
Oh yeah.
Oh yeah.
That's why I'm wearing a hat.
Oh my God. We had to do a a Zoom for a job, and I was like, I put the window open, like, oh gosh, I'm sorry, the window's open, so it wouldn't look so bad. And thankfully they didn't say like just close it. I'm like, no, I really can't. How'd you do on your speech story?
Well,
Yeah? Did you knock it out of the park?
I when I submitted it, I actually just said speech assignment. That was before I got the email. So when this is over, I'll resubmit it and put my name to it.
Okay, good.
I can do the same.
Yeah, I'll do
That'd be
that.
helpful.
And I also do the same because I accidentally put it like under a meeting. I don't know why, but I did. I put it under meeting instead of speech.
I can't wait. Okay, I just want to follow up on what I talked about and what Ginny was talking about. If you pay attention to, in your handy dandy book, review chapter 8, which is on the inverted pyramid. So when you're looking at your agenda and anticipating what you might be able to cover, because I don't know if you heard today, Governor Wolf talked about suspending, instruction indefinitely. And I think that's happened in other couple states. I think Governor Whitmer is discussing that in Michigan. They've been hit a little bit harder and more quickly than we have. But you have to think about that schools and school districts get paid a certain amount by the number per student in a seat in a school per day. So when they talk about that, like, how does that affect everything? At what point are we talking, the money that school districts get from the state, which they get from the feds, and I mean, the implications of this are huge. So we're talking about, the Democrats are talking about another, stimulus. At what point do we start bringing schools and education into that? So see if any of those items appear on your agendas. Because, last year, fall 2018, we started late because of the flooding. And there was, mold issues, but we had libraries open for kids to have, enrichment, and there was programming. Now we can't do anything. So it was just, the questions get bigger and bigger the longer this is going to go on. So how do we start coming back from this? I think is going to be interesting. But education is going to be, I think, is going to be key, because the pieces that are usually in place, we don't have those either. So, and that's why we're having participation in these meetings. I find that interesting. So pay attention to chapter 8 when they start talking about, the inverted pyramid. And there's times, and Judy and I were talking about this, like I've walked into a meeting, once was a college district, and I had talked to my editor, and this was a really, really crooked board. Oh boy, they were nasty. And I walked in, and there was all kinds of other people there, and they had on the agenda an intent to close down student housing, but it was just a statute. And I'm like, there's 500 people here, there's TV cameras, and I'm like, I run out and call the editor. I'm like, get the cameras here, and because that was not at all clear, because we didn't look up the statute for housing. We thought there was something else because there was a lawsuit and all these things happening. So And what she was talking about being, a little bit dispassionate, we talked about this earlier about consider your community. When I was at a meeting and there was a vote on a 5,000 house development, and one of the board members, city council members, was a banker in the community, and he came out and said, I could lose my job for how I'm going to vote tonight. I remember thinking, this is a 60,000, population community. Stop it! You are in such big trouble. Let me want a cat. She's very nice. Her name's Grubby. Thinking, if I was at a different type of paper and different community, this would have been this big, gigantic headline, would have been very sensationalist, but that's not my job. My job is to find out what the story is here and to reach out to him and to reach out to his boss and go, so what's he talking about here? Would you fire him if he votes against us? He's the one who should vote against us. He's the voice of reason. He's the conservation member of this board. Why can't he vote and represent his district and be the voice that his constituents voted him to, into be? So you do what is appropriate for your community. That's my best guidance. Always consider your audience. But if people say things in open session, it's best to follow up on them. When somebody says, oh, I never pay taxes, I never do this. I was also at another meeting, again, this water board, and one of the engineers was going on and on about all these things that were broken. It's like, well, this is broken and you guys never fix it. Like, and he just went on and they're like, would you be quiet? She's right here. And I'm like scribbling away going, really, you want to repeat that? But then I talked to the general manager. I'm like, okay, well, there's 50 farmers who just heard this. Let's talk about this. What is the problem? Do you have budgetary problems? Do you not have a refreshment cycle? We're in a drought. Do you just not do routine maintenance? Like, come on, what's the problem here? So followed up on it. But again, I could have gone crazy on that and scared a lot of people, but no, I just made a note. Let's do this responsibly. There's a story here. But there was a moment when I was walking out and I saw somebody try to reach in my briefcase and try to steal my notebook. Mm-hmm. So if I was taller, they probably would have got it. So always be aware of where your notebook is. And always have a hand free if you need to pop somebody in the nose. You think I'm kidding.
How do you recommend following up with someone since it will be online, since we can't go up to that person in person?
Make sure most, thankfully you have a lot of digital resources, so plan ahead. But so, for example, if I was going to go to Lock Haven,
okay,
they have, each member of the board probably has their own website.
Okay.
You have their emails in advance. So
but I'm more talking to like the public, like just your average Joe who's saying something like a public comment.
Try and stalk them. See if you can find them on Facebook. If you can get, worst comes to worst, I would also, and I've done this a lot because there's times when I haven't been able to find somebody. I wasn't able to run out after them because there was like 2 or 3 presentations and I've also been to a couple boards. This is an aside. I've also gone to a couple boards and they'd always say questions from the press. And there's oh my God, like, who was that? You gave us, this is a program I'm not familiar with, and you took a picture, like tell me who this is, because it wasn't on the agenda, but it was a huge, maybe a program from Penn College or something. I'm like, I need this. But I've always gone back to the city clerk or clerk of the board, for example. I'm like, I need this information.
Gotcha.
So they will have it too. So that person is always your best friend.
Gotcha. So
that helps. So you can always call the clerk of the board and say, they may not give you the address. They may not be able to. A lot of boards won't ask. You may say, I live in this township. They may or may not, depending how big the community is. Lock Haven doesn't actually ask for a physical address. They just say, I live in this township. I live in Flemington. I live in Mill Hall. That's sufficient.
Okay.
Also pretty small. A lot of people know each other. If that makes any sense, but
no, it does.
No, not where you guys are, but the clerk of the board can help you with that. So I reach out in advance, let somebody know, I'm a college student, it's not for publication, I'm going to cover this meeting. May I follow up with you afterwards to get information? They will help you. Everybody is going to be invested in you guys. And if they need my information, you're welcome to give them that. Questions? How you guys doing otherwise?
All right.
Surviving.
Hanging in there.
Yeah, you having fun?
No, I
No.
hate this.
Having an awesome time.
I do not like this Zoom thing. I'm literally losing it. I hate it.
I'm sorry. If it helps, we all miss you.
It helps.
Yeah, I mean,
Like, I'm really...
anything we can do to make it better for you, Mitch?
Well, I just got to take it one day at a time. That's all. That's all I can do.
Yeah. Well, I live in a college town, and it broke my heart. Sunday, the students had to be out of their housing, and it just broke my heart to watch like the last of the U-Hauls. I'm like, God, this is just wrong. This is not supposed to be this way at all. I feel so bad for them, especially like, some of the freshmen. Like this is wrong. I feel not good. But if there's anything I can do to make it easier for you, you let me know. I'm doing my best for you. Okay, so we talked about saving your initials in your file name. We got hopefully some pretty good speakers next week. I've got 3 different queries out, so we'll make it as interesting for you as possible. Your extra credit points won't show up on D2L, but I will, I keep tally separately, but if you ever want to know how many, I will let you know towards the end of the semester, because if I put them on D2L, then it wouldn't be extra, so trust me. Make sure you keep up with your book readings. Your AP quiz will be next week. I will post again, probably on the announcements, and I'll send you an email what the actual subjects are and what to look up, the categories. And remember I will revise the meeting assignment just to add the due date, just so you don't forget.
When you mean the quiz, do you mean like the quiz is going to be due next week? Like we have to do the quiz before next week Tuesday, or like by next week Tuesday the quiz should be up so you can do it after Tuesday?
I'm thinking the only way to do it is to, after we have our guest speakers, I'll make the quiz live, then you guys have half an hour or so to do it and then turn it back in. I don't know any other way to do it. Since it's open book, it doesn't matter if you go to AP online. I mean, the idea is that you learn how to use the resources you have. If you were in a newsroom or working for, a PR place or anything, there's really no way for you to cheat.
Right.
So, the idea is that you know how to use the resources to find things out.
Okay.
So, if you think of something else, we don't have live testing until end of April. So, everybody good? So, you like both your guest speakers so far?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Good. Ginny was one of my students, by the way.
Okay, that's cool.
Oh, shit.
Yeah, she's pretty amazing. She can strip a guitar like nobody's business.
Guitar?
Pardon me?
You say guitar?
Yeah.
Oh, nice.
Her voice is like she's like Janis Joplin. Yeah.
Yeah, rest in peace.
Yeah. Yeah, first time I heard her, she was 16. She still had braces on, and she would sing like Janis Joplin, and she'd go, "Thank you." Like, wait, what? Like, how does that happen? Yeah, she's pretty amazing. All right. Anything else? Otherwise, I will let you go. Enjoy the rest of your evening. Congrats on finishing your assignments. You did great.
Thank you.
All right,
Thanks.
take good care.
See you next week.
See ya.
Next week.
Bye.
Bye.